Big League Chew, man-sized wads of great tasting shredded bubble gum stuffed into a giant Stay Fresh pouch. For Big League flavor and Big League bubbles, it's Big League Chew.
Hi there, and welcome to Baseball by Design. I am SportsLogos.net minor league baseball contributor Paul Caputo, broadcasting live, as always, from the Sunday Helmet Hall of Fame in my basement in Fort Collins, Colorado. This is a super fun episode. I'm so excited for this. We're going to be talking about the Portland Mavericks today. That's Portland, Oregon, not Portland, Maine. I am with Rob Nelson, who was a pitcher for that team, has been a representative, a spokesperson for that team ever since they played from 1973 to 1977. Obviously, Rob featured prominently in the movie The Battered Bastards of Baseball, which is an awesome documentary. If you have not seen it, you absolutely have to get out there and see that movie. And Rob Nelson is the creator of Big League Chew, which is amazing. So we'll talk about all of that. Rob Nelson, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. It's a thrill to speak with you.
Paul, it's my pleasure. This is always fun.
The Portland Mavericks, for the uninitiated, for if you don't know who the Portland Mavericks are, first of all, you should know who the Portland Mavericks are. They were an independent team, but they played single A ball against affiliated teams in the Northwest League, which wouldn't happen these days. And largely because of the success the Portland Mavericks had, now affiliated teams only play other affiliated teams. You can't have an independent team playing against affiliated teams. Rob, I've been doing way too much talking here. I'm going to ask you to set the stage. Who were the Portland Mavericks? How did you get involved with them?
The Portland Mavericks were a bunch of misfit toys who just loved to play baseball. When I got out of college, I had one good season at Cornell. Nobody drafted me. I ended up pitching and teaching school in Cape Town, South Africa, because back in 1971, nobody was interested in a left-hander who couldn't break 85 miles an hour. So it was October 73. I went to Cape Town. I was teaching school, pitching pretty well for a couple of seasons. My dad sent me a packet of sports clippings and circled one little ad that said players wanted. And it was the Portland Mavericks. And my dad said, your arm seems better than ever. You ought to go to Oregon and see if you could give it a try. I was a Long Island guy. And so I went from New York. I went back from Cape Town to Long Island. I did a month's worth of substitute teaching to make enough money to go to Oregon and tried out for a team, not knowing what it was going to be like. The team was created by Kurt Russell and his dad, Bing Russell, who's best known as the sheriff, the deputy sheriff on the Bonanza TV series. Originally from Rangeley, Maine, the Russell family was just awesome. And I was one of the 300 guys who tried out for the team. But as you said, we were independent playing in an affiliated league, and that made all the difference. We had a huge chip on our shoulder, and a lot of us really had no business playing pro ball. Bing Russell had a vision. The reason there was a single A team, independent team in Portland was because AAA baseball, the Portland Beavers, had left, went to Spokane, Washington. They felt that Portland needed some time off from professional baseball. And of course, Bing Russell disproved that within a couple of months of the summer of 1973. So that's the short version.
Well, and this story is told so well in the movie The Battered Bastards of Baseball. You pop up throughout that movie, especially after the first about 20 minutes when they're setting the stage. Once the players are all on the team, you pop up pretty regularly. This is a podcast about logos and branding and identities for teams. Obviously, the brand for the Mavericks is really fun. It includes sort of a snorting bowl. It's got this bright red color palette. But I would think with the Mavericks, as much as any team, this brand extends beyond the logo, the uniforms, the sort of overall, like the visual brand of it. The brand is really established so well in this movie. You described it as the island of misfit toys, I think, a great Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer reference right there. But, the brand was really about these scruffy dudes playing against what in the movie kept getting referred to as the bonus babies who played an affiliated ball. How important was that to you as a member of the team, this idea that, as it's described in the movie, you all have paunches, you've got, sort of various versions of facial hair, just this very sort of scruffy looking band of guys as compared to the clean cut affiliated bonus babies?
Bing Russell was a genius in that he understood that if he was going to draw people to come to the ballpark, we had to have a persona. And it was right at the time when Portland was embracing the theme, Keep Portland Weird. The Keep Portland Weird concept was originated in Austin, Texas. And I don't know how it immigrated up to the great Northwest, but the city was just ready for something different. And 300 guys tried out, and Bing was crazy. He had a 30-man roster. He wanted guys to be able to go out to a pub in Boise, Idaho, and say, "Yeah, I'm with the ball club." And even though the last 5 guys on the roster never got much of a shot, Bing wanted those guys to experience the road trips, the bus, the bad hotels, the crummy breakfasts. He understood that as Kurt described him in Battered Bastards, he was like the band leader, and he was putting the band together. And we all knew that we played a role. I didn't pitch too very well nor very much because of that. But Bing understood that he needed a whole group of people who could bring something to the party. When I first didn't make the team, I asked him if I could create the Little Maverick Baseball School. And I used the players that didn't play very much at a public park in Portland, Oregon. Bing helped me set it up. I arrived in Portland in mid-June 1973. And by mid-July 1973, I was coaching 100 kids at Grant Park with my teammates as my assistant coaches. Bing understood everybody played a role there. And everybody had this huge chip on their shoulder because you had a lot of guys who'd been released 2, 3, some of them 4 times by organizational ball. We only had one uniform, a heavy red uniform. That was our home uniform, our road uniform, special day uniform. That was it. You never had to say, what uni are we wearing that day? Another thing I noticed that Bing did from the get-go, the cap had kind of a Montreal Expos look about it, multicolored, red, white, and black. But the letter on the uniform was an M. It wasn't P for Portland. It was M for Maverick. He knew what he was doing from day one. And he had a bare bones budget. He talked to the 2 newspaper guys, Ken Wheeler and Nick Bertram from the Oregonian and the Oregon Journal. He said, "I don't have an ad budget, but if a story breaks, we can flip a coin right now, and I'll alternate who gets the lead in if Jim Bouton shows up, for example."
Which
one of the newspapers got the headline. So he did everything on a shoestring.
Yeah.
But he knew that the city would embrace guys who played hard. And as it's pointed out time and again in the Netflix documentary, guys weren't there for the money. They were there for the love of the game. And that really shines through. I go to Cooperstown every year at the end of May. There's a thing called the Cooperstown Classic because Big League Chew is now the Hall of Fame bubblegum. And I hang with some of the major leaguers. Some of them are Hall of Famers. Ozzie Smith played for Walla Walla against the Mavericks in the mid-'70s. And he said he loved playing against what he called a Marine unit. You guys were paunchy. You had cigarettes in the dugout. There were like no rules with the Mavs. And yet we were managed to scrape by and win a few ball games and certainly win more than a few hearts. We averaged about 4,000 fans a night. It was phenomenal.
So you mentioned the uniforms. I want to get back to the style of play because I think that that's really interesting right now, and I want to talk to you about that. But before we do that, I do want to ask you about these uniforms because the uniforms were incredible, and I wish that you could get them now, right? Like I would love to get one of those bright red. Not only was it like a bright red jersey, you described the tritone hat that had that sort of Expos feeling about it, but the pants were red too, and that was amazing. And there was a clip in the movie where you were playing against a team that was all yellow, and I don't know what team that was. It kind of looked like today's Savannah Bananas, but you had your all red uniforms versus a team that was all yellow, and it was this amazing just sort of visual landscape. What did the guys think about playing in these uniforms?
Guys never talked about it. Nobody said, "I love these unis" or "these unis suck." Nobody. I don't remember one guy saying, "I hate these unis." They may have said, "This uni is hot as hell," because it was a thick polyester, because Bing didn't want to pay for laundry bills, or sewing up and stuff like that. And so I don't remember anybody complaining. They were just grateful to be on that bus and get to do what Bing wanted us to do. And a lot of the stuff emerged organically. So if there ever was a discussion about uniforms, it would have been hilarious because those guys didn't exactly lead the league in sartorial critique. It's not who they were. It's pretty
It's
funny.
the first use of the word sartorial on this podcast. I mean, it's a really interesting point because the documentary was made in 2014. In 2014, we were pretty well into this sort of contemporary era in minor league baseball of the wacky logo, right? 2014 is the year the El Paso Chihuahuas debuted. So certainly we were well into wackiness by then. At the time that the Mavericks played, the documentary describes pretty well these teams that you were playing against were there only to serve the purpose of developing players to feed into the major league club. There was, they didn't care about selling minor league baseball merchandise. They were almost always named for their parent club. And the Mavericks were different because they were all about Portland. They were all about the local community.
That's
I
correct.
feel like in some ways, we still, part of it is true. The major league clubs probably don't care that much whether their minor league affiliates are winning or not, but the connection to the local community is pretty strong with many of these teams. They're trying to really reinforce that. And we'll talk a little bit about the Hillsborough Hops, right? That's an example of a team that is really connected to the local community. So do you think that the Mavericks had an influence way back then on sort of where we are now in minor league baseball? Do you think that sort of hyper focus on the local community developed into where we are now?
There's no doubt that what you've just said is true, that the Mavericks could connect in ways never imagined for a short A team. I remember doing clinics where we had a couple of members of the Portland Trailblazers, the North American Soccer League Portland Timbers, and a couple of Mavericks. Yeah. They treated us like we were a big league club. And more importantly, I think we treated the fans like they really mattered. Mm-hmm. Bing, time and again, I keep talking about what a great guy he was. He did things. I remember the guys who were at the turnstiles in the stadium. After the fifth inning, he let them go home. Or more likely than not, they'd get a beer and a hot dog and they'd be in the stands themselves. And I was interested in the whole marketing side of the thing. And I said, why do you let those guys go in the stands? He said, it's the best PR I could have. Because anybody could walk into a Maverick game after the fifth inning. So the sixth inning, we'd get a spike in attendance. Local people who really couldn't afford the $2 that we were charging there. But he said, it's kind of my PR operation. It was all masterminded by Bing, but it looked so very organic. And the fans really mattered to Bing. He had the players go up in the stands, and you can see that, in the film, in the Battered Bastards, that we're talking in between games of a doubleheader. We're up in the stands signing autographs, shooting the breeze. It was really a fun thing to see a team send the message that we may not be very good, but it's a pretty good show and it's worth coming, and we're glad you're here. He did little things to make the fans feel important. We were the only team in the Northwest League when a foul ball went into the stands, the fan kept the ball. If you were in Boise, you brought the ball to the concession stand, you got a Coke or a hot dog in exchange for the ball. The Mavs did it first class. We were the only team that had a live organist, Bill Blanc on the organ, doing the national anthem, doing the in between innings, music. It almost felt like a roller rink. It just felt like these guys were attention for detail. And Bing had a bare bones staff, so everybody would do stuff. If it rained, the guys helped out, roll the tarp onto the infield. The fans felt like they were part of something. You got to remember, we're only like 4 or 5 years after Woodstock. And that we were kind of like baseball meets Woodstock, and I was lucky to be there.
So you're describing the sort of showmanship aspect of this is really important to me, because the documentary focuses on how important it was for you all to win games, and the competitive nature of the team was really important. And that's a big part of this story. As I was watching last night, and it's the first time in maybe 4 or 5 years that I've seen the movie. I saw it about 4 or 5 years ago, and then I rewatched it last night. Really enjoyed it. It improves on a second watching. There's a lot of stuff that I caught the second time around that I missed the first time. But I was reminded, it felt like a combination of two things that are sort of happening in the world right now. And bear with me for this comparison, because at first it might not seem exactly apropos, but the Savannah Bananas right now, the showmanship aspect of what the Savannah Bananas are doing, really, the Savannah Bananas couldn't give two damns about the sport of baseball, and the Portland Mavericks very much did. So I realize the comparison breaks down there, but the Savannah Bananas are all about the show, right? And I think that is something that was also part of what the Mavericks were doing. So I was thinking it felt like sort of part Savannah Bananas, and then part there's another documentary that's in the last few years called Welcome to Wrexham, where Rob McElhenney and Ryan Reynolds buy a soccer club in Wales, I think. And, and they buy this downtrodden soccer club in Wales and bring it back to prominence. And so these sort of celebrities, these celebrities who don't know this place come into this place and, create this soccer team that has a lot of success. And I was thinking Bing Russell in this movie is Rob McElhenney and Ryan Reynolds, right? Like, and he's also the Savannah Bananas with the sort of showmanship side of things here. Roll that all into one, and you've got the Portland Mavericks. Of course, it was 40 years ago, right? Like, or 50 years ago. Oh my gosh. So I don't know. I was just thinking that. I'll ask you, what do you think of the comparison?
The entertaining part for Bing was organic with the players. Mm-hmm. Joe Garza came up with the idea when we were about to sweep a team. He got on top of the dugout with a broom and started chanting sweep. We didn't have sweep night. He just did it on his own. Jim Bouton saw a feature of Joe Garagiola talking about the Portland Mavericks on TV. And here's Jim, a former big leaguer, is trying to make it back to the big leagues. He calls Bing and says, I'd like to come and try out. And Bing says, you're pitching Friday night in front of 8,000 people. And he did. So it wasn't like Bing planned a lot of the things the way the Savannah Bananas do and other teams do. It all just kind of, people took the cue from Bing that, like, there were almost no rules. Joe McLaughlin had a black Labrador who became the team mascot, who would chase foul balls down. And so it wasn't dog night or anything like that. Even when the sweep thing happened, Bing had a knack for making it last for more than just a 2 or 3 night thing. When the team got fined $500 for bad behavior, President Bob Richmond of the league, Bing sent him a check for $2,000. He said, we're going to do this at least 3 more times. Who does that? And so those things, it was Bing just talking off the top of his head. In terms of promotions, we had Max Patkin night.
Yeah. Because
Bing had great respect for Max, who was featured in Bull Durham. Mm-hmm. And Bing knew Max from long ago when Bing was a bat boy for the New York Yankees. And he just knew a lot of people in baseball. Bing didn't have any gratuitous things going on at the ballpark. Mm-hmm. There were no spin your head around and get dizzy and try to reach home plate stuff. Right. I see clubs do all the time. And that's okay because people seem to enjoy it. Bing wasn't into that. He wanted the guys to go out and play hard and play smart and have some fun. And Bing thought the key to having fun was basically kicking the butts of these bonus babies. He always played up with that. And truth be told, the Mavs were 4 or 5 years older than a lot of guys, so we should have been winning. Mm-hmm. But Bing never played up that aspect. He said, these are guys that nobody gave a chance. We are the last stop. Yeah. One funny thing with the Mavericks, we had Gordon Erfer painted the outfield signs for us. And the last year, he was repainting the red school bus. Wasn't red in the beginning, but it became red because it was the Maverick school bus. And I walked under the stadium where Gordon was working, and I looked at the top, and there was a typo at the top of the thing. I walked into Bing's office. I said, have you seen Gordon's work out on the bus? He says, he's the Picasso of ballparks. The guy is amazing. And I said, come on out here. And Gordon had put the apostrophe in the wrong place. Oh, no. He had Portland's Maverick Baseball Club. Oh, no. Instead of the Portland Mavericks Baseball Club. And Bing looked at that bus and he smiled at me and he said, leave it alone. I like it the way it is. And if you notice in the documentary, there are banners that say Portland's Maverick Baseball Club. Bing just had a knack for picking up every little nuance of nuttiness that took place with the guys in the team. So, we were the Bananas in the sense that we brought fun to the ballpark, but it wasn't organized chaos. Yeah. It was unorganized chaos. It really was.
Well, and so that leads me to another comparison that I thought of, which is when you hear I've done some reading about Negro Leagues baseball. Bob Kendrick, the president of the Negro Leagues Museum, has been a guest on this podcast. And when you hear the style of play described in Negro Leagues baseball from, the 20s through the 60s, it's very much what was described last night as I was watching the movie with the Mavericks. This style of play where it was scrappy. It was based on speed. It was based on smart base running. It was based on manufacturing runs, but that all derived from sort of an us against the world approach to the game, right? And in the same way that the Mavericks talked about, taking on the bonus babies from the affiliated teams, the Negro Leagues clubs would talk a lot about, the scrimmages they had against major leaguers.
Yes, that's
and
true.
So there's a parallel there as well. Is that, I'll ask you again, what do you think of that comparison?
I think it's a terrific comparison. My daughter Paige, who we named after Satchel Paige, would agree with me. So we know a little bit of the history of the Negro Leagues, but the whole idea, Satchel Paige was flashy, but the bottom line is the man could pitch. Yeah. One of the greatest of all time, and that's true with so many of the Negro League players.
Yeah.
And the things that the difference between the Mavs and the Negro League players is that we didn't have that much talent. So when we had a Reggie Thomas who could fly like the wind, stole, I don't know, 72 bases in 68 games. He had a green. I was gonna say he had a red light. He had a green light anytime he got on base. Funny thing about Reggie, there was a Greek sandwich shop across from the ballpark, Souvlaki Stop. Okay. If you stole a base, you want a sandwich from Souvlaki Stop. Now you got to remember, we're all making $15 a day.
Yeah.
And some guys less. Some guys were making $300 a month. Reggie was one of the high price players. He was making $15 a day. Mm-hmm. And I swear I saw a game when he hit a ball into the gap and rounded first and pulled a hamstring. They come out, they sprayed it, they stretched his leg and stuff. 2 pitches later, he stole second base, and 2 pitches later, he stole third base, and he won himself 2 sandwiches. And Jim Bouton was sitting next to him, and he said, Reggie just doubled his income, And those are true stories, and you can't make that up. Bing didn't say, listen, I want you to fake an injury and then steal 2 bases. It's almost like Bing gave us carte blanche to be as unorthodox as we could because it would help the team win. He didn't have guys do dopey stuff that was against the grain of trying to be a good team.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that comes through. That absolutely comes through in the documentary. One of the things that has happened since the documentary is the advent of the Hillsborough Hops. I know that you have had a relationship with that team. We were actually on the field after a ball game in Hillsborough with my Baseball Palooza road trip guys, and I was speaking with K.L. Wambacher, who has also been a super good guy. He has been a guest on this podcast when we featured the Hops, but they have done Mavericks night, and they have done things to honor the Mavericks. Hillsborough is, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes outside of Portland. As if you watch the documentary, you know that the Portland Beavers came and went in Portland over, different variations, famously pushing the Mavericks out of town when baseball was sick of the Mavericks. Hillsborough has a different relationship, obviously, with the team. Obviously, it's much later on the timeline. Can you describe that relationship that you have and that the Mavericks have with Hillsborough?
K.L. Wambacher could be a major league general manager. And he and his wife, and I think their daughter, just love living in the greater Portland area. And he's put together a team there. I'm talking about the staff, that it's just an amazing operation. They see the big picture. They understand the nuances of the new game. They probably embrace the new speed up rules better than everybody because Kale is the leader there. And he said, this is good for the game. In terms of respecting the history of the Mavericks, we could not have been welcomed more graciously than by the Hillsborough Hops. It's not easy to do when you got ball players getting sent down, called up, and so forth. But KL has managed to do that. They're very, very community involved with things that matter in the greater Hillsborough community. And they really are a fans first operation. And from the clubhouse guys to your ushers, everybody is on message at that ballpark. I was delighted to hear that they're getting a brand new ballpark and they're doing it the right way. I have nothing but respect for the Hillsborough Hops, as do all the other Mavs. When we show up there, it's like my 9-year-old son at the time, Charlie, said to me when somebody recognized me on the main street on Broadway in Portland and said, "Didn't you used to play for the Mavericks?" Oh yeah, you're the left there, you're the gum guy. And my son Charlie, as we walked away, said, "Hey, Dad, you used to be somebody." And they said, "Yeah, Charlie, that's true." And the Hillsborough Hops understand that we used to be somebody. And we're all in our 70s now. And our skipper, Frank Peters, is going to be 80 next year. I'm sure the Hops are going to honor him like he was Casey Stengel. And the thing I love about the Hops is they don't poke fun at the Mavs. There's no tongue in cheek when they speak in terms of who the Portland Mavericks were. We set the table for the Hillsborough Hops. They basically took the best of what Bing set up and added a professional flair to it, largely because of KL. They just know how to do things, and they do the little things really well. I've never seen a team so community involved. Every night they're honoring somebody you never would have heard of before, whether it's the Boys and Girls Club or the YMCA. It doesn't matter. It matters to the people who get on the field, and it matters to the Hops. I think the guy's a genius.
And they have done Mavericks nights, right? Where they actually played with the Mavericks uniforms.
That's right. It's pretty cool. When Dansby Swanson was with the Hops for like 3 weeks, he hit his first home run as a professional wearing a Portland Mavericks uniform. So if you go on the internet and look for Dansby Swanson first home run as a professional, he's got, I think, number 5. And fans were bidding on the Mav uniforms. And the fellow who bid on the Dansby's uniform negotiated with Dansby afterward, and he gave him twice the money that the guy was willing to pay for it. And I think maybe a glove and a bat or something. But it was so typical Portland, Oregon, that a deal like that was negotiated in 3 minutes, and Dansby's got it somewhere in his home. But that was a great night. A lot of Mavs were there, and to see the guys out there. And the cool thing about the team was none of the guys said, "I don't want to play in these pajamas."
Right.
They understood. And I think, again, it's from K.L. Wambacher. I think he explained to the team, these guys used to be somebody. Yeah. And I think it's fair to say that KL would probably agree that the Hillsborough Hops wouldn't be the hit they are had they not picked up a lot of cues from Bing Russell and Portland's Maverick Baseball Club.
I can certainly see that. You gave me the perfect segue here with when you said you were the gum guy. At the end of the documentary, there's a brief little snippet of the fact that you developed what is now Big League Chew, which is a staple of every kid's little league career. I certainly used to chew Big League Chew all the time. That's an amazing story. This is, like I said, it's a podcast about branding and logos. I can immediately picture Big League Chew, right? Like I can picture that pouch. I can picture like the illustration of the ball player and the type, and it's got a very strong visual brand. But how in the world did you become a chewing gum magnet in the baseball world?
My 2 brothers, Ed and Harry, prefer to call me the Bubblegum Baron. And I like that a lot. I was a middle school teacher who got lucky. I don't know how much time we have, but the quick story is I didn't make the Mavericks in the beginning. I created the Little Maverick Baseball School. One of the Little Mavs was Todd Field, an 11-year-old kid from Southeast Portland, who fell in love with the Maverick magic. He became a bat boy for the Portland Mavericks. And because he became a bat boy, he got to travel with a team, and he learned if you loved your work, you could be like an 8th grader for the rest of your life. He had so much fun. Todd, of course, is a writer-director in Hollywood. His film Tar this last year was up for 6 Oscar nominations. He's a big league writer. And the reason I bring up Todd is because when he was a Maverick bat boy, he used to cut up slices of licorice and put it in a Red Man pouch. And the first time I saw him do that, I said, "Todd, you're 13 years old. What are you doing?" He said, "Relax, Rob. It's licorice." Maybe a day later, he and I were having a discussion. I said, most kids don't chew licorice. I like your idea, but I think it should be bubblegum because that's what kids do. Now, going back even further, when I was 11 years old, one of my favorite players in the big leagues was Nellie Fox, because my nickname has always been Nellie. And I wanted to hit and look and play like the Hall of Fame second baseman, Nellie Fox, who, if you remember his bubblegum trading card, it had a huge lump in the one cheek because he chewed a lot of the other stuff. Yeah. So when I was 11, I used to chew just copious amounts of bubblegum jammed in my cheek. If I had an 11 o'clock Little League game, I'd start chewing bubblegum at 9 so I could look the look. And I used a thick handle Nellie Fox bat. And so I think when people say, what's the origin of Big League Chew? I would say Nellie Fox, Chicago White Sox Hall of Fame second baseman. More importantly, it was Todd Field who lit the light for me. And long story short, we eventually, Todd and I, went to his mom's kitchen and we made the first batch of Big League Chew in 1979 on Babe Ruth's birthday. And we didn't know it was Babe Ruth's birthday.
Nice.
It's February 6th. It was such a Portland Maverick moment that I found out years later, February 6th was in fact the day Babe Ruth was born. And here we are 1 billion pouches later.
Wow.
A minor league player with 1 win in 3 seasons with the Mavericks. It just fell into place. Todd and I keep in touch all the time. The reason the business emerged is because we had former big leaguer Jim Bouton. I shared the bubblegum idea with him in the bullpen. And Jim said 3 things, actually. He said, I love that idea. I could sell that idea. What would you call it? And so on a handshake, Jim and I became partners. He put up about $8,000 or $10,000. And to answer that third question, I answered his question with a question. I said, I don't know, Big League Chew? I answered in the form of a question. And Jim said, give me a piece of paper with 20 names on it. I don't think you're going to do better than that.
Yeah.
And he was right.
Yeah.
He got a deal for us with a small division of Wrigley Amaral Confections out of Naperville, Illinois. And we had a 3-year deal with Wrigley. They thought it would be a cute novelty after year 1 when we'd sold $18 million worth of gum. The following year, the Cubs were sold for $22 million. We had no idea that we had, as my dad called it, lightning in a pouch. And so it just grew and grew and grew. I bought out Jim about, 20 years ago. Now the gum is made in Buffalo, New York, a small company, Ford Gum. And the reason for that was because the Mars company bought out Wrigley. And I knew that a niche brand like Big League Chew was probably not going to be served well by a mega confections company. And I got an agent, Bob Anderson, out of Chicago, and Bob found this small company, Ford Gum, who we're now over 50% of what Ford Gum makes. And when I show up to Akron, New York, just outside of Buffalo, I get treated like an astronaut. Like Rob's in the factory, Rob in the house kind of thing. When years ago, when my kids were small, Jane and Charlie, the twins were, maybe 6 years old. Paige was 11. We walked through that factory. They used to think Dad worked in his car because in many ways I did. I didn't have an office or anything.
Right.
I was just doing it on my kitchen table. And Bouton was doing a lot of the work. I'll tell you, the one thing about Big League Chew, it allowed me to keep pitching. After the Mavs were done, I was doing advertising work with the Jugs Pitching Machine Company, but I hit the road. I went back to South Africa. I went to Sydney. I ended up my baseball life pitching in London for the Enfield Spartans in the British National League, and I was in my 40s. So the gum has given me many, many blessings, and a lot of people along the way helped me do that. So it's kind of a long answer for you, and I can go on further. But I asked Kurt and his 3 sisters, why did your dad keep me on the team? Because he knew I couldn't pitch at that level. And they said, our dad just loved people who loved baseball. He let you do the baseball day camp. I became the pitching coach. I ran his tryouts. And I was a guy who, at Cornell, I was okay. But the Mavs, I couldn't pitch a lick. Every trick I used that worked overseas got hit 450 feet. So it's a funny story that Todd Field is nominated for Oscars and I'm a bubblegum baron because Bing Russell and Kurt had a dream and put a team in Portland, Oregon. It's preposterous.
Rob, it's an amazing story. I appreciate you so much taking way more time than I anticipated this might take. Rob, thank you. This has been amazing. What an amazing way to spend this time and hear these stories and talk about the Mavs and Big League Chew. Thanks so much for being a part of it.
My pleasure, Paul. Thanks a lot.
Rob, I know you're on Twitter or X, I guess now. Where can people find you there?
Yeah, bigleaguechew.com is where people go. Okay. People who buy stuff, a lot of it buy from Amazon now. Our biggest retailer is Dick's Sporting Goods.
Okay.
But for just about every mom and pop store, you can get it at Joann's Fabrics or Old Navy. You can go to bait and tackle shops off the coast of Maine. I get photos from friends of mine. They're out for using their iPhone. Rob, they're selling gum, in Louisiana at some bait shop. I just love it. I can't believe it.
Amazing. Rob, thank you so much. This has been such a pleasure.
Well, thanks again. See you. Bye-bye now.
All right, everyone, welcome back. Dan Simon is here with another Studio Simon Stumper live from the studios of Studio Simon in Louisville, Kentucky. How am I doing, Dan, saying Louisville?
Say it again.
Louisville.
That's perfect.
Is it okay? All right. Good. It's one of those.
My understanding is when I moved here, I was immediately informed of how to properly pronounce it. Prior to moving here, I thought, like most people, it was Louisville.
Mhm.
And though you'll hear some slightly different pronunciations, it's basically replacing the E, Louis, that sound with an Louisville instead of Louisville. Wait, that doesn't sound right.
Ooh, Louisville.
It's also, I guess, you know what? It's where the emphasis is also. It's Louisville instead of Louisville.
Well, and
So
I've heard some people who have lived there for a long time who just mumble 3 syllables and try to tell you that they're pronouncing the word Louisville. So live from Louisville, Kentucky, here is Dan Simon. Dan, we are talking. This is a really fun episode. I just was speaking with Rob Nelson, who, as you, I'm sure, know, features prominently in the documentary The Battered Bastards of Baseball, about the Portland Mavericks, who played from 1973 to 1977 in Portland, Oregon, and have a really fun brand with, you know, these solid red uniforms, including red pants and Expos style tritone cap. Man, we could get into a lot of things here, right? Because there's been the various iterations of the Portland Beavers. Obviously, you created the brand for the Hillsboro Hops, who are just outside of town in Portland right now. We could talk about Big League Chew, right? Rob Nelson is the founder of Big League Chew. So this is a rich vein for potential questions here, and I'm curious to see where you're going to go in today's episode about the Portland Mavericks.
Well, based on that little preamble right there, I have a feeling that you're going to get this one, which is good that you're going to get it. But I think you're going to know it right away because you have just referenced that great documentary film, The Battered Bastards of Baseball. For those of you who have not seen it, I believe it's on YouTube. Watch it. It's really, really good.
It's on Netflix now.
I'm sorry, it's on, okay, maybe that's where I saw it, was on Netflix. So you've seen The Battered Bastards of Baseball?
I saw it years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. It came out in 2014, and I saw it. I think I saw it during COVID. I think it was one of my sort of COVID evenings at home by myself. I was like, let me check this thing out. And then I really loved it. And then just before recording with Rob Nelson, I introduced Baseball by Design's wildlife consultant, Ranger Amy Burnett, to the movie and rewatched it. It was her first time watching it, so I got to watch it with fresh eyes through Ranger Amy's eyes as well. So yes, so I have seen it twice, including once very recently.
Okay, well, we have established previously on this podcast that I am not privy to the segments that precede the Studio Simon Stumper on each episode. I hear it when the episode drops, just like all your listeners hear it. I don't hear it in advance. So I don't know what's been discussed. So did you discuss that documentary during your conversation?
It's, we were sort of off and on. We were talking about the team. We were talking about the documentary. We were talking about Big League Chew. We were sort of all over the place.
Well, let's go ahead and ask it, but you're probably going to know it. So
now I'm going to feel really bad if I don't, though.
Yeah, if you don't know it, you were not paying attention to the documentary. So here we go. Here's our question. Which former major leaguer played on the Portland Mavericks in an effort to revive his major league career? Was it A, Mark the Bird Fidrich, B, Dennis Oil Can Boyd, or C, Jim Bulldog Bouton?
It was indeed Jim Bulldog Bouton, who features prominently in the documentary, who there was a lot of discussion about how he got blackballed after his book Ball 4, was out of Major League Baseball for 7 years, came back, pitched with the Mavericks, and it kind of made it feel that it was a little. I said to Rob during the conversation that there was a certain element of Savannah Bananas to this Mavericks team. Now, the Bananas are very much sort of a sideshow and not about the baseball. The Mavericks were very much about the baseball, but the way they sort of, you see retired baseball pitchers play for the Bananas. You see that they're kind of trying to make a show out of it. And there was an element of that for the Mavericks, right? Like, and Jim Bouton coming back and pitching for the Mavericks was very much bananas-y to me. And I know there's a lot of areas where that parallel falls down, but I don't know, the fact that they welcomed him in when no one else would was a really important part of that, the show aspect of the Mavericks. I haven't let you tell me whether I'm right or wrong. Dan, did I get it? Did I get this one?
No, of course you got it. Yes, and let's talk a little bit about how that all worked out for old Jim. He pitched for the Mavericks in 1975. He had a 4-1 record in 5 starts with a 2.20 ERA. So a pretty good showing there. He then returned to the Mavericks in 1977. I don't know what he was doing in 1976. And he went 5-1 with a slightly higher, or very much higher ERA of 4.50 in 9 starts. But that was apparently enough to get the Atlanta Braves to sign him. And in 1978, the following season, after going 11-9 with a 2.82 earned run average for the AA Savannah Braves, speaking of the Savannah Bananas, they would have played in the same stadium. That's the home stadium of the Grayson Stadium in Savannah, Georgia. Bouton got the call back up to the show 8 years since he last took the field in a big league uniform. In that season, he made 5 starts, going 1-3 with a 4.97 earned run average. In 29 innings pitched, he struck out 10, but he walked 21.
Oh, no.
Those are not the kind of strikeout to walk ratio numbers that keeps one in the majors. And that was the end of his major league career. But he did make it back. And here's our Did You Know?
Oh, okay.
That season in 1978, when he was with the AA Savannah Braves, one of Bouton's teammates on the Savannah Braves that season was Brian Snitker, the current Atlanta Braves manager. So, and now speaking of Brian Snitker, I would like to think that your listeners are, well, I think it's a given that they're baseball fans, and a lot of baseball fans like a good baseball book. And there's a baseball book. It's not as heralded as Ball 4, Jim Bouton's book, or some of the other baseball books out there. There's a book called One Shot at Forever: A Small Town, an Unlikely Coach, and a Magical Baseball Season. It's by an author named Chris Ballard. And it's a true story about a high school baseball team in, as it says, a small town in, Ohio or Indiana, or a rural town. And one of the players on the team during that quote unquote magical baseball season was Brian Snitker, same guy we're talking about. So One Shot at Forever, baseball book fans, if you have not read the book, Dan Simon of Studio Simon Stumpers recommends it.
The Dan Simon Book Club. I love the idea of Dan Simon's baseball book recommendations. This is going to have as much weight behind it as like Oprah's book club. I think once you get the Dan Simon stamp of approval, then that book is just off and running. I love a good baseball book, so I will check that out. I would be remiss, by the way, if we did not bring up the fact, since we mentioned the Bananas, that your Savannah Bananas work that Dan Simon has done is featured in the Hall of Fame as of just very recently. The Savannah Bananas have an exhibit now in baseball's Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, and congratulations to you. That must be very exciting for you.
Well, thank you. Yes, it is. Our mutual friend and Curve Brim Media member, Anna D. Tomaso, of course, has her podcast, The Baseball Bucket List. And I never thought about it being on my bucket list, but I have thought about it. I've always hoped for something of mine to be in the Baseball Hall of Fame. I first visited the Baseball Hall of Fame back in the 70s. And when I went that one time, there was one of the exhibits, there was a room that had all of however many teams there were at the time. It would have been less than the 30 there are now, because
26 back then, right?
20, I think it was 24 back then.
Oh,
So
okay.
they had all of the uniforms of every team, home and road uniforms, displayed. And I thought that was a really cool room. I've been back to the Hall of Fame twice since then, and I don't recall them having that room. But if they did, I have worked on 2 major league brand identities. So had they had that room, uniforms I designed would have been in the Hall of Fame, but I don't know that they were. So the most recent time I was at the Hall of Fame was in it was 15 years ago. So whatever year that was. And there was a bobblehead box that the designer who worked for me when I worked for the Dodgers designed. I guess I art directed it, but he designed it. I don't remember what the particular display there was, but his work was in there. And I remember seeing that and going, oh, I wish something of mine was in there. And now that, I guess we can cross that off my bucket list. It's happened. My work is in the Hall of Fame.
Well, that is, it was very exciting, and I was thrilled to see that, and especially after the great time we had in Alabama at Rickwood Field, seeing a game together. I when I saw that happen, when I saw they were going in, I was hoping that the picture of me with the ball that I caught was thrown into the stands by the catcher, and you behind me sort of pointing at the ball with a big smile on your face. I was thinking maybe that should be in the Hall of Fame. Maybe there should be a picture of you and me in the Hall of Fame with a Savannah Bananas ball. Alas, we were not contacted and asked about that. So I don't think that's part of the exhibit right now.
Well, maybe we'll get the chance when they do the baseball podcast exhibit, which is, I think, something that the Hall of Fame needs.
Maybe the 2nd annual Studio Simon Baseball by Design baseball road trip should target Cooperstown this year. So I don't know. Dan Simon, thank you so much. This has been so much fun, as always. Who knows? You never can tell where these conversations are going to go, and this has been another fun one. And so I look forward to having you back next week for another of your Studio Simon Stumpers. Thank you for the softball this week. I was, it's not always a softball, and I've been batting about 500 recently, so I may have needed you to groove one to get me back on track here. So I appreciate that this week.
It was my pleasure, and I'm looking forward to another enjoyable Stumper segment next week. I hope you have a good week. Until then.